So today we are talking about pollinators. And I jokingly titled my presentation, Don't Kill All the Bugs, because our human instinct, as gardeners, a lot of us want to kill all the bugs. We see them like this lady with her blue larva. She doesn't know what it is. It's making her plant look a little detrimental. Does she kill them or not? She doesn't really want to kill them unless she knows what they are and what did they turn into. And like we said, a lot of the birds and other creatures rely on a lot of the larvae for food for their babies, for their young. So don't kill all the bugs, and that's where we're starting today. So welcome to this series presented by the Master Gardeners of Lake County. We are part of Ohio State University Extension. This is our little advertisement, which is made up of family and consumer sciences, 4-H, community development and agriculture, and natural resources, which is where the Master Gardeners fit in. If you don't have this information, this hotline or Ohio line, you can go to this as a good resource to find out different information about things around in your neighborhood, around the state. There's a host of information at this website. I'll be putting up other websites as we go too. And if you need to copy this, or like I said, the presentation will be online, the slides, you can look at that and get the websites there also. So that was my little commercial for Ohio State Extension. So who likes bugs here?
I do.
Oh, a lot of people do like bugs. Okay, well that's good. Who doesn't like bugs? Oh, nobody raised their hand, which is really cool because a lot of times I think I'm talking at these things just to convince people that we should like bugs. Even the bees, the mosquitoes, and the beetles. Once when I worked at the Metro Parks, I was given the assignment for Bug Day. It was called The Benefits of Bugs, and they gave me the mosquito. Can you think about a benefit to having the mosquito around? And it's for children, so of course we had to make it fun. We just set up a little obstacle course, and at the end of the day, they got eaten by some birds. Because that was the benefit, the only benefit I could figure out for a mosquito. So I'm glad most of you like bugs, even spiders and stink bugs, wasps, bumblebees. Well, there's a lot of bugs out there. Basically, they outnumber us. 200 million insects per one human being. And they also claim that there are 300 pounds of insects for every pound of humans on the planet. So they really outnumber us. So I think it's a good idea to get to like the bugs if you don't already like the bugs, or learn to at least live with the bugs. Some of the benefits of the bugs, that they do aid in decomposition. So without the bugs and the other animals, decomposition would be greatly slowed. They prey on the bad bugs. You know, everybody's heard about releasing ladybugs into greenhouses to kind of eat the aphids and things that can be found in a greenhouse. They're a food source for others, like birds and other insects. And lastly, they do aid in pollination. So I'm glad you're already on the ticket. You all like bugs, along with moths, wasps, birds, and bees. And even some tree squirrels, hummingbirds, and parrot species, because guess what? They are all pollinators. So everyone knows that bees are pollinators, but did you know there are some 20,000 species of wild bees that pollinate plants? But the wasps, the flies, the beetles, butterflies, they also aid in pollination, along with some vertebrate pollinators, including bats and the monkeys, some species of monkeys, which we don't have here, tree squirrels, and birds, like the hummingbirds. And there's a parrot species that actually aids in pollination. They're all pollinators, and as such, they provide a vital service to all human beings. So here's where we're going to go. A little definition. A pollinator is defined as anything that helps carry pollen from the male part of the flower, which is the anther or the pistil. I'm sorry, the anther or the stamen, to the female part of the plant, the pistil or the stigma. Some pollinators, including many bee species, intentionally collect the pollen because they're using that in their hives to make their honey and and to feed their young. But others, such as butterflies, birds, and bats, move pollen accidentally. They're not there for the pollen. They might be there for the nectar source, but in obtaining that nectar, they're actually getting pollen on their parts. And then they visit another flower and they're pollinating the other flower. Pollen sticks to their bodies, and as they go from flower to flower, they pollinate all the plants in the garden. So they're unwitting pollinators, but they are pollinators. Once again, pollination is the movement of pollen from the male part to the female part of another flower. Without pollination, most plants can't make seeds and fruits and young plants. Many plants are wind-pollinated, like the grasses, small grain crops, and some conifers. But others rely on the animals to carry pollen from flower to flower. Plants attract pollinators by offering rewards, such as the nectar or the oils that they can find in the flowers. Flowers depend on these insects, and they do offer rewards at various stages, small rewards that they repeat at regular intervals that encourage the pollinators to make return trips. So pollination is just not fascinating natural history, it's an essential survival function. So think about this. Without pollinators, the human race and all of the terrestrial ecosystems of the land would not survive. This is what I found kind of interesting. Of the 1,400 crop plants grown around the world, those that produce food for all of us, almost 80% require pollination by animals. Visits from bees and other pollinators also result in larger, more flavorful fruits and higher crop yields. In the United States alone, pollination of agricultural crops is valued at $10 billion annually. Globally, pollination services are likely worth more than $3 trillion. So I know this group is convinced about the bugs, but one simple fact is that some scientists estimate that 1 in every 3 bites of food we take can be traced back to an animal pollinator. That's a lot to think about, but it is a kind of a jarring fact that without the pollinators, the food we eat we wouldn't have the variety, we wouldn't have the food. So they do provide a vital service. And just the pollinators are having some problems that I'm sure you probably all heard. So the pictures up here show some light pollution that's looking from Cleveland over to Detroit, 60 miles away. There's the industry of farming and use of pesticides, and there's a lot of pavement, non-permeable pavement development, etc. So just in the last 40 years, there has been a 45% decline in insect populations. 45% in 40 years. All these things are aiding to the decline. But we as humans are now in a position that we can declare victory over the bugs. It's what we wanted to do, didn't it? We wanted to get rid of those bugs in our gardens and our yards. But I'm here to make you think about this because they are vitally important to us and to our planet. So the United Nations Global Assessment Record has found that 1 million plant and animal species, mostly bugs, are at imminent risk of extinction. Now, we don't want to scare anybody about this, but it's just food for thought, and we can make a difference. So many of our native bees, we've all heard about the bees having problems. Maybe you have noticed in your yards and gardens there aren't so many bees this year. Maybe the weather, we've had a lot of drought. We don't know the status of most bees because there's so many species. But all indications suggest they're on a decline based on assessments of specific groups. A recent analysis by the Xerces Society for the Conservation of Nature found that 28% of bumblebees in Canada, the United States, and Mexico are in a threatened category. Did you know the monarch just went on the endangered list here? That's kind of sad. Native honeybees are the most commonly known pollinator. They are volunteers and they work tirelessly pollinating a variety of crops. Recent problems with colony collapse and bee pests have put the wild honeybee population in danger. So this is also leading to many initiatives to aid in honeybees' health, which I think that's why you're here, to see what we can do to kind of help out all of these insects. So we do know that there are a lot of things happening to them. It's a combination of factors, including habitat loss, pollen and nectar pesticide exposure, parasites and pathogens. And in some cases, the flowers that the bees forage on have pesticide, not just insecticides. These chemicals can kill bees directly or cause a variety of sublethal effects, such as impairing their ability to find their hive or to provide food for their larvae. One group of pesticides in particular, the neonicotinoids, maybe you've heard of those, have recently been studied intensively by scientists to determine their impact on the bees. Primarily because they're used in agriculture around the world. They're a class of insecticides that act on the insect's nervous system. They're more selective. They have greater toxicity to the insects and are safer for humans. That's why they're being used currently. We do want to eat food, and our food basket is not just here, it's all over the world these days. But the most widely used neonicotinoids are all highly toxic to bees. And these are used worldwide as a pesticide to take care of a lot of the insects that the farmers are finding and the commercial growers are finding in their fields, because a lot of times it's not just the farmers, it's the commercial growers. Products that contain these neonicotinoids and active ingredients have bee warning boxes on them. So if you're going to buy an insecticide or a pesticide at the store, look for the bee warning box on the label or on the container. And you must use specific instructions to limit the bee exposure. But there is a combination of things happening. But we can help, 1 yard at a time. Although some of the most important steps to protect our pollinators need to be made in agriculture or managing of public lands, we also need to protect pollinators in our own yards and gardens. How we manage ornamental landscapes has an impact on two of the most important factors: habitat quality and pesticide exposure. So believe it or not, gardeners can play a huge role in conservation by providing plants and nesting sites for pollinators, and by adapting your garden practices to prevent using pesticides and maybe use a more integrated look at how you can take care of the creatures that are bothering you in your yards and gardens. The good news is it's not too late. We can all play a part in the comeback of these vulnerable populations. So let's get started. What can we do? Simple and beautiful. Grow more flowers. Different flower shapes, sizes, and colors appeal to a variety of pollinators. Grouping the plants together in sunny locations helps find the pollinators find these plants easier. So if you have just one daisy over here or a whole clump of daisies over here, it's an easier target for these pollinators. So plant in clumps, in drifts. It looks more natural too that way. And the pollinators don't have to spend so much energy looking for those right plants. Many plant lists are available to help with the selection that helps the pollinators. And the website that I'm going to give you, and it's on this talk, is go.osu.edu/gardens and bees, all together, all lowercase, all together. It's a good one. It does get out a lot of native plants and plant lists, and it tells you exactly which ones help pollinators the most. So growing all these flowers, we want to be aware that different flower shapes do attract different pollinators. The different colors attract different pollinators. These daisy-like flowers on the coneflower and the gaillardia pictured here provide nectar and pollen in shallow flowers. And they're often visited by bees and flies, and they have shorter mouth parts. Who thought flies are a good thing? They do help pollinate plants though. Tubular flowers, like on the foxglove, the trumpet vines, the monarda, the Mona lavender, they do attract hummingbirds and butterflies. and those with the longer tongue that could draw into the nectar producing and the pollen areas. So we want to plant different shaped flowers to invite all of the pollen producers out there, or the pollen gatherers, I should say. So we want to provide bloom through the season, and this is a big important one because the pollinators are here year-round. You can help by planting a sequence of blooms throughout the growing season, from early spring right through fall and even into winter. Pictured here are crab apples, bluebells, forsythia, daffodils. Think spring. Different species of bees, butterflies, and other pollinators are active in Ohio at different times of the year. The mason bees are here early. Other bees come after that. The queen bumblebee and the morning cloak butterflies, they're here throughout the season. So they'll forage from spring when we see them migrating up. If you, like I have, my daughter lives in Texas, I see them there first in the spring. And then it's amazing, they finally get up here, as endangered as they are. Most of that is due to their habitat loss. But they forage from spring into the cooler days of autumn. So if we want to plant for the spring, we want to plant everything from trees to shrubs to flowers. Their source of pollen and pollination can be found in these type of plants. Not just the flowers, it's the trees. How many people have seen butterflies on oak trees or maple trees? Yeah, they're there. They're there helping in pollination of those trees. In this picture we have redbuds, some hawthorn trees. Spring bloomers are the native dogwood. And then the bottom row we also have some shrubs. We have red willow bushes, red and yellow twig dogwood, viburnum, spice bush, elderberries. So all of these things are plants that will attract and help the pollinators during the springtime. Now summer is a peak time for bloom for almost all of our plants. And our summer, I hate to say it, it's already starting to go down the other side already. But there's a lot of blooming things going on out there right now. Many to pick from. The zinnias are beautiful right now if you planted them from seed, or marigolds, coneflowers. Even if you have a wildflower meadow with cosmos, or the black-eyed Susans are blooming right now. So all these things help support our pollinators. It's peak time for them to find plants that they can pollinate. However, I didn't want to forget these other summer bloomers: spirea, trumpet vine, grapevines, clethra. So it doesn't have to be just herbaceous, perennials, or annuals. It can be trees and shrubs that help our pollinators to survive through the seasons. And then as we go into fall, which we're starting to get there already, my Joe Pye weed is already blooming, there's a picture here. The sedums are just getting ready. The New England asters and the goldenrods are great choices. You'll see bees all over these plants, and butterflies, sometimes moths too. And they're all pollinators, so we're helping them by providing a vast array of bloom through the season, including some of the vining plants like Virginia creeper, the winterberry species, which is a ground cover, sumacs. These are all fall blooming plants that help support our pollinators. In winter, even in winter, bugs are out there. Sometimes it's surprising to see bugs on the snow, but they are out there looking for food source. So in the winter we have crocus, or the pasque flower, snowdrops, and even the winter aconite. I'm going to give you 2 sites. So if you need, this is a very good one to copy, that lists the pollination through the season and what kind of plants support what pollinators. So the first one is www.Ohio Native Plant Month, all one word, all one, .org. And the next one is, it's a Ohio website, ODNR. It's OhioDNR, all lowercase, .gov/discover and learn plants. These are very good sites for resources to help you learn about flowering plants through the seasons. And more winter bloomers, we have the hollies, the eastern red cedars, pines, river birches, and hemlocks. So these are all good things, all good plants, and there's a whole host more of plants that you could plant to aid pollination throughout the season. We want to have a good food source there spring through winter for our pollinators. But there are more things that we can do as a gardener, a home gardener. So let's see what those are. So I'm here to tell you that I hope that you're not all hooked on these beautiful cultivars and hybrids, because they really don't offer a good source for our pollinators. They're sterile in a lot of means. A lot of them are. So that means that the bees, butterflies cannot get in there. There's no nectar reward. They can't exchange pollen. There's no pollen there for them to get. So use the straight species. You'll see a lot of things say species on them, but don't use the cultivars or the plants that are bred with double flower petals, like petunias. Petunias are great, but just don't get those big fluffy double ones. So if you include a little bit less refined, I'm calling them less refined, they're still beautiful, but you are actually helping the pollinators by planting basic species, straight species, as opposed to hybrids and cultivated plants. Plant native plants. Native plants attract native pollinators. So in general, native plants support life cycles of 10 to 100 times more insect species than non-natives. And a few plants, such as native cherries and willows, serve as host plant. That means insects will lay their eggs there, the larvae will feed there, and then the adult insect will hatch there. And these host plants support more than 100 times more insects than other native varieties, the cherries and the willows. So it's amazing what one plant can do. Consider adding more locally grown native trees, shrubs, and plants. Can you aim for 70% native plants in your garden? I know I'm trying to do that. Sometimes they're not as pretty. Sometimes the neighbors don't understand, what you're doing out there. But if you explain it to them, sometimes it's easy to convert them to the thought that we were supporting our pollinators. And this also supports our plant nurseries. I don't know if you guys all know what these plants are, but we've got bloodroot, spiderwort, and the red cardinal flower. These are all natives here in Ohio. And they're all very beautiful. These red cardinal flowers, you can find these things hiking through metro parks in your area. I've seen the red cardinal flower at Veterans Park in the spring. Likes wet, boggy areas. So, as gardeners, we want to put the right plant in the right place, because otherwise, if you don't have a wet, boggy area, that's not going to live there. So if you go out in nature and you see the spiderwort, on the other hand, grows kind of like everywhere. I've given it away to many friends and neighbors and relatives. And the bloodroots, too, are very easy to cultivate. Holden does a native plant sale in the spring. There's a lot of native plant nurseries. Support those. Ask questions at those places. See what more we can do for our pollinators. We talked about some of these host plants. So if you could plant host plants, we all know about the monarch. The monarch, host plant for the monarch will fly everywhere and gather nectar wherever it can. But in order for it to survive, it needs milkweed. Straight and simple. Without milkweed, no more monarch butterflies. Milkweed, the butterflies lay their eggs there. We talked about the eggs develop into larvae, and they feed and feed and feed on this milkweed. And then our videographer said they're hatching some at some of these locations now. It's pretty exciting to see them escape from their chrysalis. They spin this chrysalis. It's like magic when they come out. They're not a caterpillar anymore. They're a beautiful monarch butterfly. But they require milkweed. Some other things, let's see. The pearl crescent caterpillars require New England asters, and the black swallowtail caterpillars feed on plants from the carrot family, like dill and carrots and parsley. So those are host plants for these specific butterflies. They actually provide a source for them to lay their eggs, and develop their whole life cycle on these plants. There are other good sites. Ohio DNR, if you go to ohio.dnr.gov, there's a lot of information about butterflies of Ohio, skippers, moths, things like that, that you could find. These all are pollinators. So if you're like the kind of person who likes to do some research, look up the ODNR websites. And remember, we do want all those caterpillars in our yard, even though we don't know what yours is. Sawfly, well, maybe we don't want that one. But because they are a good source of food for many other bird species. And they actually, some of the birds feed their young, all these caterpillars. They don't just eat them, but it's the only thing their babies will eat. So you can do what you want with your sawfly. But if it's not doing damage, I always look at it's the tolerance level that you can accept. When I walk through my yard, Japanese beetles are really big right now. I know they are in my yard. I don't like them. So what can I do about them? Am I going to take out my pesticide? Well, first off, it's not going to work on them. They're pretty hard-bodied insects, and of course they start in your grass in the summer. The grubs, we all put that stuff down on our lawns to keep the grubs away. However, I only do that in my front yard because it keeps the neighborhood happy, but I don't do that in my backyard. So I do have some skunk damage. They're digging out there, but the grubs do turn into the beetles. And it's your tolerance, okay? So I tolerate some digging in my backyard. It's okay. It's okay. I put up with that. But then when the beetles come and they're starting to really chew on my spireas, or you'll see they'll skeletonize the leaves of plants, apple trees, whatever sweet and juicy for them. And you'll see these skeletonized leaves, and you know that's Japanese beetle damage. Now, can you tolerate some of that? It's up to you. What else can you do? Sometimes I take my hose with a vengeance and I kind of like aim it right at these plants, spray these beetles off, and I step on them. I mean, it's what you have to do. But some of the levels you have to accept, some of these levels of insects in order to accept the whole cycle. There's a balance in nature, everything's balanced. But yeah, some of these bugs we don't really care for. But I'm not going to get out my big spray can and spray the whole yard. But I might drop them off, step on them, spray my hose at them, and just tolerate some of the damage. Yeah?
Japanese beetles were clustering and eating my blueberries.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And we got the Japanese beetle bags. Is that a terrible thing?
That's a bad thing. It attracts the beetle. It has a hormone in there, pheromone, that attracts the beetles. It's a good thing if you put it in your neighbor's yard, maybe. But no, you really don't want to put it in your yard. What's that?
They had to put it like 10 miles away.
Oh, yeah. But I don't recommend it. I mean, you can do what you want. There's a lot of products out there. But what I'm here to tell you is learn to tolerate some of this damage.
But they were eating all of the fruit.
I know. Can you net them?
They are netted, but...
They got under the netting?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel your pain as a gardener. I mean, we've tried to grow certain things that... My zucchini this year got a hit with the borer.
Yeah.
So a lot of us in the gardens, I have a community garden in Willoughby, and yeah, we all got hit by it. So, there's only so much we can do. But I do not advocate, killing a lot of these creatures with a pesticide, because the pesticides are non-selective. So if you read on the label, this is only for Japanese beetles, but I don't think there is such a thing. But it'll list all the other insects. Insecticides are usually more specific. Pesticides just kill everything. So, did you have a question?
Is there anything good about Japanese beetles?
Well, their food. The soaked by mosquito, story when I was with the park district is their food for other creatures. And the grubs are food. Once again, the larvae. The birds are eating them, the skunks, yeah. So, no, sometimes insects, you have a hard time finding the good about them. I understand that. Some of the things that we can do to help our pollinators is to provide nesting sites for them. These are natural nesting sites like brush piles, dead standing trees or snags, or clumping of grasses for overwintering in the habitat for the bees and other insects. But you can also provide, some of the cavity nesting bees make their nest in the twigs of trees and shrubs. So in the last several years, we've had a change of mind in like what we're cutting down in the fall. You know, we used to try to cut everything, get rid of it all. Well, come to find out that a lot of these insects use these standing twigs to overwinter. So recommendation is not to cut everything to the ground, maybe tidy it up as best you can, maybe cut off some dead flower heads or whatever appeals to you, and then leave those standing twigs until later in the spring and cut them to the ground at that point when the insects have kind of used them as their home. But a lot of these insects will burrow in trees and logs. Bumblebees prefer to nest in already made cavities, and they might use some old rodents' nests and even in the ground. So if you have mole holes or like I do, chipmunk holes, you know, some of these insects are nesting in those holes in the ground. But you can also provide your own artificial nesting sites by, the top one is like a pre-made bee box. Somebody bought me one of these some years ago. They're okay. They do encourage, mine actually encourages the mason bees, which are one of the first bees that we get here in this area. But you do have to be careful to clean out these nesting boxes and things, because you can do more harm than good if you're not keeping these boxes clean. Sort of like a bird box, you know, where they have to be cleaned out, a bird bath, etc., to prevent pathogens and parasites from entering them. But there's lots of good examples here of artificial nesting sites. Something else we can do is limit our pesticide use. We talked about that a little bit already. But did you know that homeowners use more insecticides per acre than farms do? Because we all want to get rid of those bugs. But like I said, don't kill all the bugs. They're very important to us. But our goal should be to bring bugs to our yard, not keep them away. And even those mosquitoes, I mean, we don't like them. This year hasn't been bad because we haven't had any rain. But you know, a lot of times we have these trucks that drive around our neighborhoods. Well, they're not necessarily just killing mosquitoes. So if you can limit pesticide use in your garden and walk around your yard, like I said, take a different approach. It's called integrated pest management, where you walk around, take a look at your garden. What's the tolerance level? How much of this Japanese beetle damage can I take? Are they killing my blueberry plants? You know, am I not getting any harvest? Everybody's tolerance level is different. But you can hopefully reduce the damage by not hurting the other pollinators in your yards and gardens. Try some organic methods. I know in my vegetable garden, I use soaps and sprays. They are just for certain bugs, not killing the good bugs. I want to see the bees. I want to see other pollinators out there. How else do we get our fruits and our vegetables? So think about that tolerance level that you're accepting of, and be a little bit kinder in your application. Even in the lawns, provide a water source. This summer especially, I can tell you that a little dish or even a little muddy puddle, this year the insects just, I mean, I've seen everything, dragonfly, everything trying to survive out there this year. Even hummingbirds in my neighborhood, after I would water something, there they were right on the leaves trying to suck up some moisture because it's been such a dry season here in Northeast Ohio. So this all helps them to survive. Little things like that. Here's a big one, turn out the lights. Remember how we say in that old saying, like a moth attracted to a flame? Well, that's true. The bugs are attracted to the lights. So if you can change out your white lights for yellow lights, that will help. The bugs aren't so attracted to the yellow lights. If you can put your motion sensors on your lights, that's another good one that you can do to help our pollinators, because they will be attracted to the lights just like the moth to the flame. And it ultimately is not a good thing for them. Seems like an easy thing, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Well, here's a bigger one, shrinking your lawns. In the last century, we imported European turf grasses, and they become a big part of our American yards. But the grasses are foreign to our climate and our habitat. And to keep them healthy, we have to rely on mowers, blowers, additional water, fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides. Seems like a lot of work for the lawn, which doesn't support any pollinators. So I think it's time for a change. And in our communities, also all the runoff that comes from our fertilizers and things, guess where that goes? It goes into our water supply. So remember a couple years ago, I haven't heard this year so much, the west end of Lake Erie was blooming with green algae, nitrogen and phosphorus runoff. That's a big component of our lawn fertilizers. And herbicides and pesticides, they all go down into our waterways. So if you can think of trying to restrict your lawn to areas where you walk, I don't know how big, I have a pretty big yard, so that would be a problem. But like I said, you try not to do certain things. I have a small front yard. I try to keep that good. My backyard, it's game, that's for the skunks and other things, because I try not to apply pesticides or herbicides, things like that, unless it's a problem, which I'll tell you about in a slide or two here. So replace your lawn with beautiful plantings for the pollinators. Some places are planting meadows or woodland gardens, depending on your habitat or what kind of surrounding situation you have. You don't need to get rid of your whole lawn. Might shock the neighbors a little bit if you all of a sudden just like, oh, well, we're gonna let the grass grow and see what happens here. But you can do it a little bit at a time. Start small. And I'm here to tell you, sometimes when you're sitting in these classes and programs, you kind of think, wow, there's so much to do. Don't be overwhelmed. Just do something. Do one little thing. Plant more flowers. Plant more natives. Start small. Replacing your lawns can be beautiful. I know my mother-in-law years ago replaced her little tree lawn in Wycliffe, which was probably like a foot wide, with just some rocks. I mean, it wasn't the most native-friendly thing to do, but she didn't have to fertilize or mow it or weed it, and the chemicals that they use in the winter on our snow removal were killing things out there anyway. So it's just another way, a different way of thinking about replacing our lawns with something else. I think the one picture does show some tufts of lawn on the lower right-hand side there, or left-hand side, your left-hand side. But there are different types of grasses that you can plant. Like my husband has a big thing against moss because we have a very shaded yard. It's okay. You know, he spent years trying to kill this moss. But it's a beautiful, you just have to embrace what you have. You can't adjust it. You got dense shade, heavy soil, you're gonna get moss. Not this year so much, it's been very dry. But there are options, and it can be a thing of beauty. So remember, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Many plants that were frequently considered weeds provide pollinators with food, such as the dandelions, milkweeds, goldenrod, and even clover. So if you can tolerate some of these weeds that benefit the pollinators, that's a great thing. On the other hand, some invasive weeds outcompete native plants. Like in the spring, one of my neighbors has lesser celandine. It looks like marsh marigold. It's got a beautiful yellow flower. It's not marsh marigold. It just takes over the whole lawn. It doesn't support any pollination. So we want to try to eliminate some of these invasives like not the marsh marigold, the lesser celandine, the garlic mustards, the buckthorns, privet, things like that. But remember, I mean, if you Google dandelion, you'll probably find that it's a food source. It's lots of things over in Europe. Here in the United States, we're not so fond of it. We want to try to get rid of it, but it does provide pollination services for our insects. So let's recap a little bit. Choices matter. The plants you choose to plant matter. Plant native plants. Do not plant sterile plants, double flowers. Read the label. Only purchase plants that were produced without pesticide application. That neonicotide thing is because a lot of growers will use insecticides, pesticides when they're growing their plants. So that's a big one. You can support nurseries that don't support those practices. They bring in plants that have been organically controlled by. I worked in a greenhouse for a while. We used to put up the sticky traps We didn't spray. We put up the the reds, the yellows, the blues that would attract different things, the mites, the aphids, etc. So there are other ways to take care of all of these issues without using pesticides. Try to shrink your lawn. Practice integrated pest management. What is your tolerance level? And I wanted to include this last note here with the bird, the little black-capped chickadee, because I thought this was interesting that 96% of songbirds, 96%, need insects to feed their young. One black-capped chickadee will need anywhere between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars in one season to feed its average 5 chicks. It's a lot of those caterpillars. So everything we do does have a consequence. It does make a difference. I mean, if you're seeing less songbirds, if you're seeing less butterflies, I mean, part of it is what can we do? Start 1 yard at a time and advocate. Purchase plants from a reputable source. Let garden centers know what you're looking for. Ask the questions to the growers. Where did it come from? Were pesticides used? Is it pollinator friendly? Some of the labels have become very good with this information. Yeah.
So if you say you've already bought plants that have been exposed to pesticides, if you cut them down, will they recover in the next year and produce for your yard?
The pesticide, you mean because it's been exposed to pesticide, how long will it stay in your plant? That's a good question. I really don't know the answer to that question. But a lot of things are applied. Here's what I would think. If it's applied with a foliar spray, then it's probably just going to affect the leaves. A lot of things systemically, which means it's got to go into the roots, would have to be applied a different way. A lot of times the foliar sprays do not go systemic. So in that case, it probably would be good for the next season. You probably would be good. I would definitely not use pesticides again on it unless you see you're having a problem. But then I would say, maybe I should think of a different plant for this area. But if you've already bought it, I would give it a try, but not to use pesticides further. Did you know that, I mean, we've all known about Roundup and stuff. Next year you won't be able to buy it at all. It's gone, yeah. So the next thing is vinegar and salt. I mean, you know, we've gone back to some of those things. Yeah, yeah. But the only thing about, my husband said that same thing. Funny that you said that, because the only thing about it, it doesn't stay viable for very long. And if you want it to stay viable, I should probably say, you might have to bring it in to keep it at a temperature, because if you're going to store it out in your shed in Northeast Ohio, oops, it might not work. So let's spread the word. Be an example for others. Encourage pollinator-friendly practices in our communities. A lot of times I know that when I used to work for the park, they did this. They would have sticks that would say, pollinator-friendly habitat, because it looks kind of scruffy some places, you know. But maybe that's what we got to do. We got to put up a stick, encouraging pollinators. But it does take a little bit of thinking to wrap your head around some of these changes. But it can happen, and indeed it should happen, one plant at a time. Public policy and economies are affected by people, and you and I can and should make a difference. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of these other websites. If you want, or if you don't want to copy them, it's all going to be on tape here. The first website is a great place to start. It will take you to specific ecoregions, like we're in the Eastern Temperate Forest, and it will give you a list of the appropriate plants for this region. And it will tell you how many pollinators each plant supports. Like the oak family is the largest, supporting 436 caterpillars. So the oak trees are like wonderful for our pollinators. The second website will help you by finding native plants for your specific zip code. And the third and the fourth site have a host of information for you to take a look at. They're the Xerces Society, which talks about our natives and pollination. So happy pollinating. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but are there any nurseries in the area that you would recommend for having an abundance of native plants? Or, maybe you don't feel comfortable.
I really,
Blue
bluestone perennials.
That's where I go.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I haven't planted a lot of plants. My yard's pretty full. Do you have a source? Did everybody get that? The question was, is there a good source for native plants locally? Bluestone, we said, was one. And I'm sure there's others. And look at the tags. Those labels, are very informative. They'll tell you not only about sun, shade, water, but where they can be found in nature. Some of them say native plant right on the labels. So it's a good source of information, right, looking at those plant labels. Was there another question in the back?
In regards to the neckties, is it my understanding that the big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot, their plants are actually treated with this? And should it be on the label if they are?
That's a good question.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to the big box stores. It depends where they're getting their plants from. Some of the stores use local producers. I know, I hate to say this, but like our Mark stores use locally grown producers out in Perry. My friend lives on the west side. They use locally sourced nurseries out on the west side. The big box stores, they're not always the best. I haven't seen it on any of their labels, to be honest with you, but maybe somebody has. It should be stating some, or I would ask. And the hardest part about that at the big box stores, usually those people don't really know. So if you can find a reputable grower in your area to ask those questions to, they'd be they're more aware of what's going on. Well, the big box stores, even though they might have some great deals, and they might have some native plants, read those labels and be careful what you purchase there. Because you really can't ask anybody there. That's been my experience at a big box store. Yes?
Creeping Charlie, when it blooms in the spring, is it beneficial to the insect?
Creeping Charlie, is it beneficial? I don't know, to be honest. There are a lot of things that it doesn't have blooms, but that doesn't mean anything. Sometimes the nectar source is something different, but it does become invasive, I know, a little bit, the Creeping Charlie. So that's what I would caution you with. However, I do find it great for potted containers and things, as far as like draping over the edges, but I don't know if it's beneficial. There's a whole host of plants out there, and I would, search the website, Creeping Charlie benefits. It's as simple as that sometimes. And I know my neighbor has it in a pond even, and it can become invasive sometimes because it loves water. Oh. Yes?
So are you saying invasive plants then really aren't good for pollinators?
A lot of them do not support pollinators. Yeah, and the native plants do support more pollinators than the cultivated plants or the hybrid. Well, definitely the hybrid, but even greenhouse cultivated plants, like our pepper, all those things we buy every year, the annuals and things. If you can go with it more native, you're going to support more pollinators. Yeah.
What about hostas? Are they good pollinators?
Hostas, well, they do have bees. They do, if you can get the flowers to come up on them. If the deer don't eat them off or anything, they will. So bees will buzz around there. Yeah. Anything that has a flower. That's why the Creeping Charlie, I don't know if it has a flower per se. I've never really seen a flower on it. But anything that's blooming is going to support some pollinators. Maybe not your best choice is the hosta, but it's still, I know I have a very shady yard. I have a lot of hosta. So yeah. And I am trying to, in my own way, trying to put the natives more up front. Like I've had the geraniums, the wild geraniums. I've been moving them around the yard a little bit because they do support pollinators in the spring. They like it in the shady spot. So there are other alternatives to hostas or ferns which may not support pollinators. Anything else? Yes, one more.
Are growers required to note on the label or that tag that they use pesticides?
The law keeps changing. I don't think they do at this point. Does anybody know any different about that? Yeah, I don't think they have to at this point, and that's why it's kind of nice to go, if you get familiar with a grower, like Bluestone or your neighborhood garden center, or they know exactly what they're doing as far as treatments for the plants that they're growing. They might be more pricey than the big box store. Anything else? Well, thank you all for coming. Oh, I see one more question, one more hand.
I really don't have a question. I just wanted to say a gardener that I follow in Britain, they have no mow May.
Yes, I've heard of that, no mow May, because it helps support the pollinators. That's exactly why they don't mow in May. They're trying to bring that here to the States. I've heard that picking up a little steam. But I actually don't mow until very late in May. I live in a cul-de-sac, so I'm like surrounded by people that take great care of their yards and stuff, but let it go a little bit. Of course, do you have dandelions and clover? Because these are the things that they aren't so picky about that in Europe, and they'll let those things go. Whereas here, I know, well, we're throwing our weed and feed down in May, so. Yes, no mow May.
I wanted to thank Kathy for her.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.